All right. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Ooh, that does work. Love the acoustics in this room. Thank you so much for coming out this afternoon. I am Lisa Given. I am Director of the Social Change Enabling Impact Platform here at RMIT and also a Professor of Information Sciences sitting across both GUS, the Global Urban and Social Studies School, and the School of Computing Technologies. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to our very first event of the week, the Social Change Symposium, which is on throughout this week, celebrating all things social change and also highlighting the work of our HDR students as they embark on their milestones this week. So if you see a PhD student looking like a deer in the headlights, they might be lost, they might be thinking deeply about some body of theory or some methodology, so please throw them a smile as they pass you in the hallway. We will be talking a little bit later about some of the events that are coming up throughout the week. But this is our launch event. So we've got a keynote today, we have a book launch, and all of that is going to be followed by wine and cheese. So please don't run away too quickly as we get to the end of the festivities. It is my great pleasure right now to introduce Dr. Sarah Polkinghorne, who is a research fellow with me in social change, who is here to deliver today's acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Lisa. So we want to begin by acknowledging the people of the Wairung and the Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation. As we know, it's on their unceded lands that we conduct the business of this university. We also respectfully acknowledge their ancestors, past, present, and emerging. RMIT's work occurs in many places, of course, and as such, we also wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians and ancestors of the lands and waters all across Australia. Now, as you're hearing me speak, you've probably already observed that I'm not from around here, and you'd be right. I'm Canadian, and I'm a very recent arrival, so I'm very grateful for the welcome that I've received here. And very briefly today, I wanted to mention that I come from a place known as Treaty 6 territory, which stretches across the Western Canadian provinces of Saskatchewan and Alberta. Now, Treaty 6 is an agreement signed in the late 19th century between the Canadian government and about 50 First Nations, mainly Cree nations, though not exclusively. And it absolutely profoundly affected the landscape and the context of what I think of as home. This is a photo of that place, pretty much right in the middle of Treaty 6. So being so far from home as I am today naturally makes me reflect on what it means to belong, what it means to be at home. And so for me today, I just want to acknowledge that this opportunity to reflect on those things represents an extra gift of being able to be here on these unceded lands and working at RMIT. Thank you. Now, next, it's my delight and my privilege to introduce Dr. Steve Gonson, who's going to bring some introductory remarks. Let me tell you a couple of things about Steve. Steve is the HDR director in the College of Design and Social Context. He's won multiple awards, including the National Citation for Outstanding Contributions to Student Learning from the Australian Awards for University Teaching. And more recently, he's a recipient of the Dean's Award for Innovation, Adaptation, and Resilience for his management of the HDR program in the School of Media and Communication during COVID. His teaching covers cinema, national and international cinemas, film adaptation and documentary studies, and his research explores intersections between local and international cinema industries. He's the author of The Ned Kelly Films and American-Australian Cinema Transnational Connections, and you can hear him regularly on ABC Radio as an expert commentator. So let's hear from Steve next. Thanks.
I don't really need an acknowledgement. I will be talking so briefly, but thank you for that lovely acknowledgement of country and for that intro to me. I'm sure this isn't the reason why I was asked to speak, but I would like to just take this time to congratulate and thank Lisa for all the work she's been doing. She's really turned this event into something that really feels like a symposium with great keynote speakers and workshops all across the week, embedded also with those milestone events. Before we had this, the milestone events were pretty much within the school and they were very limiting, and candidates would really just see their supervisors and colleagues that they would sort of sit in the office with. and it wasn't really open to other schools and other areas of the college and also the university. And this really shut off the candidates from broader research connections. And what we've been really trying to do with this, an aspiration of what we're trying to do with this, is build better networks for the HDR candidates across our institution by also bringing in some great speakers from outside. So this is a forum allowing researchers to share ideas and research in a wider interdisciplinary context. And that really is what social change is all about. Our LISA's enabling impact platform. It is inherently interdisciplinary by looking at how research can influence the broader ethical impacts that it makes. And that's something we're really going to be celebrating across this week. And what LISA has done with this symposium is bring together a total interdisciplinary network of HDR candidates and established academics that allows candidates to connect and engage outside their own schools and disciplines. And I know this is something that Tim's always really wanting to encourage as well, that, you know, break down those walls between the schools, and let's just see how we can communicate by looking at those overlapping areas of research across what we do. So across the week, LISA has compiled a terrific program, and I encourage you all to attend all of the great workshops and keynotes that we've got. So congratulations, LISA, on the vibrancy of this program. It's really exciting to see what you've been able to do, and I also congratulate you on the work you've been doing as the director of the Social Change Platform. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Steve. That's wonderful. It is an exciting week. I'm sad to tell you that all the workshops are full, which is very exciting. There is a waiting list. If you're really, really excited about it, you can maybe beg and plead your way in. But it tells me that in our November event, we're going to have more of those. And if anyone in the room is interested in having offering a workshop, please do hit me up later for that opportunity. But now to the business at hand. I'm very excited to be able to introduce to you Dr. Rebekah Willson, who affectionately goes by Becky, who is joining us today all the way from Montreal, where she is an assistant professor in the School of Information Studies at McGill University. Before coming to McGill, she spent 3 years as a lecturer in the Information Science program in the Department of Computer and Information Sciences at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. She's not new to Australia. She did her PhD down under at Charles Sturt University, where she got her PhD in 2016. Her research examines the information people need and how they find, share, and use that information, particularly focusing on often forgotten or marginalized individuals who are undergoing transitions in their lives, living with uncertainty, including academics working on short-term contracts and early career researchers who may be dealing with the fallout of COVID-19. She's currently president of the Canadian Association for Information Science. Welcome, Dr. Willson.
It is lovely to be here. Thank you so much. And I'm going to stand over here, so I have the sort of security blanket of my slides. But I did also, so that was a lovely welcome, also the lovely acknowledgement of country. But I also wanted to do my own. So I do my work in McGill, in Canada, in the province of Quebec, and I just wanted to acknowledge where I'm from. So McGill University is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations, including the Kanien'kehá:ka, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinabeg. I recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which McGill stands. And I also recognize myself as a settler, and as such I have the responsibility to work towards decolonization and reconciliation. So just wanted to mention that and to take part in that tradition as well. So what we're going to be doing today, I am coming to you from the field of information science, and I am speaking to you my focus will be on people who are maybe new to social change. So some of you in the room will have a lot more experience, and it would be lovely to hear more about your experiences and your understanding. This talk uses principles from information science to help identify and use supports that are maybe new to you, or to find new ways to kind of support that kind of research. So we're going to talk a little bit about social impact to make sure we're all on the same page with it. I'll talk about professional values as an important starting place so that impact work doesn't just feel like one more thing to do, but you can incorporate it as an important part of your work. Then we're going to talk about collegial and institutional supports, ways to see what's out there and can help you in your work and your research. Then we're going to sort of end by talking about fostering impact, which is more aimed at people who have administrative roles or roles of leadership and what they can do to help. And then hopefully we'll have some good time for questions and discussion. So obviously there's been a lot of increasing focus on social impact, social change, and there's been a lot of discussion within governments, funding bodies, universities about how important it is. And this, of course, is a shift from the sort of more traditional approach of thinking about the impact of your research on your discipline and moving towards the outside of academia. So the Australian Research Council discusses this, that the Australian government recognizes the importance of research, science, and innovation for increasing productivity and well-being to achieve long-term economic growth for the Australian community and to enable Australia to engage effectively with current and future national and global challenges. So you can see where they're feeling that this is a really important area, and that there is an increasing focus on showcasing or measuring the societal benefits from research and a need for better coordination in reporting and promoting the impact of these research outcomes. So this is, I think, important to kind of keep in mind that sort of context. It is also useful to recognize that people talk about social change, social impact in lots of different ways and use lots of different terms. Social transfer, knowledge exchange is often used in the UK, whereas in Canada, we often use knowledge mobilization, but community engaged impact, all of these things are often referring to similar kinds of ways of working. But the definition that I often use is looking at the effect on change or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy or services, health, the environment, or quality of life beyond academia. So you can see it's very, very broad, and it is broad for that purpose, that it's not trying to pin you down in one way, but to think essentially about all of the ways that the research could have impact outside of academia. So it could also include benefits, harm reductions, and harm prevention, and this change to all different kinds of things. So what people are doing, their attitudes, activities, performance, policy, practices, all of these kinds of things. So it is a very broad way of looking at social impact. One of the things that you'll often notice as you start to read more in this area and engage more with it, there are a lot of different views about how to engage in social impact, the role of communities and stakeholders, and what should count as social impact. And often there are there's like basically I would sort of consider a continuum of approaches to social impact and engagement. And it can range from everything to disseminating research findings to the general public, through to more of that designing workshops to based on research findings to help educate stakeholders. But then there's often getting more and more engaged, where often people are also planning and implementing interventions to make some sort of change, that they are then examining the results of that change and looking at what is happening. So there is a wide spectrum of things, and I think it's important to recognize that lots of different ways to take on this work, and obviously it's a broad field in general. But one of the things, especially for a lot of us who have been in academia for a while, it is useful to recognize that this can be a real change in orientation, in approach, and in the skills that are required to do this kind of work. Just because we are skilled in one type of research does not mean we are necessarily skilled in doing social impact work. Conducting research about impact often requires a lot of time and energy to learn to develop our knowledge, to acquire new skills, and to also make the networks that we need in order to be able to take the research that we're doing out into communities. So this is, it's when we first approach this work, it can often seem maybe a little more on the daunting side, not sure where to start. And often because we work in research, we feel like we should already be there. But of course, this is new skill development for a lot of us. So shifting orientations to think about social impact and how to plan a project inside a project often requires this additional skills. So often when we're talking about the research that we're doing, we're creating some sort of research project, but then to actually look at the impact that that project is having often requires essentially a project inside a project, having to do more work and planning to make sure that we can actually start to look at and understand the impact that it's having. So those are important things, I think, to keep in mind. It is important to learn about social impact and think about how we can integrate it into our academic practice more generally. And I think when we start to integrate it, we can see that better projects happen and better engagement with communities. So work that I've previously done before, I think from that, we had a really interesting discussion about what does it mean to do social impact work. And one of the things we had a lot of discussions about was the need to consider at all stages of research how to build in this idea of social impact. How do we, what kind of methods do we need to use for collecting data that will tell us whether or not we're having impact, and how do we then communicate and translate that findings for other people. And if we can do that at the start, to have that sort of basis and planning and orientation towards social planning, that can be a real help in the kind of quality of work that we can accomplish. So I wanted to definitely talk about professional values, because when funding bodies, universities, governments start to mandate that we do social impact work, it can be easy to sort of to have it become a tick box exercise. This is one more thing that we have to do, and that we don't necessarily integrating it into what we're doing, but just making that, have we done it, yes or no. However, if we can start to plan carefully, our research can have profound impacts on communities. We can find that our what we're doing can have a wide reach, and it also can be personally rewarding. And I think that that's often something that's lost when we aren't thinking about, does this work align with the things that I care about? So I think it's important to take time when we're first starting off in what we're doing in our research to consider what really matters to us as researchers, as well as us as human beings as part of that research to help guide what we do. So obviously values are the principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what's important in life, but I also think it's useful to think of them as beliefs and ideals that are significant and long-lasting. These are the things that are sort of foundational for us. And they also help us to define what's desirable or undesirable. And the reason I think it's important to take the time at the beginning to think about this is because they underpin why we do the work we do and how we carry it out. And that becomes very important in guiding us to how we conduct our research. I think it's useful to think about these questions of what do we care about? What do we want to work towards? And what do we want to be known for? And if we can consider that, that can help guide us in how we want to carry out our social impact research. If values guide your impact work, it becomes a lot more meaningful for the communities that you're working with, again, as well as for yourself. So as an example of this, in my first professional job as an academic librarian, I felt completely lost. I had a very difficult time in sort of translating what I had been learning in university into what I was supposed to be doing on the ground, not because I didn't have knowledge, but it was quite overwhelming. And I often found I didn't really have the information that I needed to do the job that I wanted to do. And this actually became the focus of my PhD research. I started looking at people, academics, who had just started their first full-time job. So in thinking about this work, and looking at the change that I want to work towards, I want PhD students and early career researchers to be better prepared for academic jobs and for academic departments to be better equipped to help them. So this for me is the change that I want to work towards. And in terms of my social impact work, I do now talks for HDR and ECR groups of people, and I talk about the experience of what it's like to finish off your PhD, what you can expect, what it's like to be on the academic job market, and I'm trying to engage with people, let them know these things, as well as to prepare them for what that's actually like. So I'm aiming to make practical use of my findings. So this is how I have tried to implement sort of my own professional values and the things I care about. And it also helps drive the work that I currently take on, the new research projects. So in thinking about that, it's useful then to think about what can you do to help in your work. Again, a lot of people when starting social impact work, it feels like there is, it can be quite daunting. There's a lot out there. And one of the things that we know is that colleagues, peers, and those in positions of authority are key sources of information and support for academics. So building professional networks becomes extremely important as part of this work. We know that colleagues offer mentorship, moral support, practical support, as well as being a key source of information for the work that people do. One of the really important things is that colleagues know a lot more what it's like on the ground. So rather than relying on websites or policy documents, they can't really tell you what it's like to actually do the work. And this is where they become extremely important, particularly because when we're first starting out, we don't know what we don't know. So this is where finding colleagues who can help is key. So relating this back to information science. So when you're learning a new skill or working in a new institution, it's important to build those professional networks and what we refer to as information relationships. So they are connections that you build between colleagues that help you facilitate information sharing, and it helps you to actually be able to do something with the knowledge that you share. So they are relationships that often are, they're based on friendship, but they are also professional. So this is the meeting someone in the lunchroom, having a chat with them, starting to talk with them, hear the information that they have, and then gaining something from that. And it can seem, you could look at this as in a mercenary way that, you know, you're seeking people out to give you information, but typically they are not one-sided. People bring different things to the relationship, but essentially it's an extremely valuable relationship built where there is trust. You feel that you can ask questions and they will provide you with some of the information that you wouldn't be able to get in any other way. So it's often useful to be developing these types of relationships with a variety of people because, of course, everyone has different perspectives, and to get diverse perspectives, experience, and expertise from people, it's great to talk to a wide variety of them. Now, of course, when we start saying networking, a lot of people, particularly academics, start to cringe. And I have to say, I am not a great networker, but it is a skill. It is something that you can do, that you can learn, and it has been in my personal and professional life a really important aspect, and I have gotten better over the years. One of the things that we often think of, or at least many people often think of, is that when you are doing networking, it has to be this very sort of glad handing at conferences, schmoozing type of thing. And I think one of the useful things to be sort of more strategic in your thinking about networking is that, yes, professional networks are very important, but you can develop them where you are. Every time you're in a room with other people is an opportunity to meet people. And in information science, we would call this an information ground. So a place where people of social groups come together and interact, and that social interactions take place, information is shared, but it's not necessarily the purpose of that. So again, the lunchroom, you are there to eat lunch, you're not necessarily there to share information, but it happens. And you often have people who come together who have similar interests, you're working in similar areas, and this can be a great opportunity to network. Committee meetings, talks, workshops, etc. are all great places in order to meet people. So basically the networking can take place in a lot more natural way. So networking where you are works well because you're with others who share your interests. So this room would be a fantastic place to network, for example. It also means that when you do something like go to a committee meeting or go to an event or in a workshop, you can get at least 2 things out of what you're doing. So you get the content, the reason, the purpose why you're there, but also a new connection. So this, for a lot of us who are not necessarily extroverts, this can be a really great way to do that sort of networking. So if you come to meetings and events a few minutes early with the intention that you will meet some people, this can be a really great way in order to do this. To sort of commit to talking to at least one person. Some people do this naturally. Others of us have to push ourselves a little bit more. But one of the wonderful things about academics is that they love to talk about their research and they love to share what they know. So asking someone about their research is a great way to do this. And let people know that you're actually interested in learning more about impact or looking for collaborations. When people know that you have an interest, they're much more likely to tell you these things and to let you know, to share their knowledge with you. And one of the things I do recommend, might be a little old school, but to carry business cards. It's a great way to make sure that you make a connection with someone and that you're able to connect with them later. So thinking about events where people are likely to be and then placing yourself in their path, as in, you know, that meeting over coffee, chatting with someone can be a really great way to network as well as to get the, you know, to be there for the reason that you're also there. Networks and information relationships do need to be cultivated and maintained. They take energy, time, because they are essentially an investment. And sometimes you don't always know, you know, what you will sort of get out of this, but often it's to meet people, to share. It's a wonderful way to get to know the community. And often those cultivated relationships come back to be very helpful in sort of more direct ways. But when you're thinking about the people that you'd really like to develop and maintain a network or an information relationship, sending emails to follow up with people once you've met them is a great way to extend that. Offering to buy someone coffee to continue a conversation. And if you have had someone who has given you good help or advice, actually sending them an email and letting them know, that really can help establish, for them, it helps people to recognize what's useful, they feel good about it, but also to maintain and extend that relationship. And just as an example of something that happened in my own life, so when I was at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, I met a research development officer who obviously works with HDR and ECRs a lot, and we started talking about the research that I was doing around with PhD students and ECRs, and she invited me to present at a VTI regional meeting. And VTI is the UK organization that supports professional development of researchers. So it was lovely to get this invite. And of course, once I did that talk, then I met staff members at the national VTI office. And they invited me to do a talk at the national conference. And once, and actually that's a picture of me in the middle at the national conference, I'm still up on their website. But at the national conference, I then met other research development officers from around the UK who invited me to do talks for ECRs and PhD students, which was exactly what I wanted to do. So it was a little bit of a roundabout way to get to do the social impact work that I wanted, but I made great connections. I, got invited to do talks and speaking, and it was a really useful way to create a network that then resulted in social change. And I had wonderful interactions, particularly with PhD students who are having problems at the end of their writing up phase. I still remember one woman who came up to me at the end of my talk and said, I thought I was the only one having problems finishing writing my PhD, and she was really glad to hear about this. And I know for her that that was a useful thing. So sometimes it's the connections that you make that come about in a roundabout way, but all coming from, meeting people and exchanging with them. The other thing I wanted to mention, now, this is what I had referenced before about a talk that I did, a panel I did with some other researchers. But one of the things that is quite difficult about social impact work is that it's often quite hidden. And I know all of these researchers and I talk with them, because they're colleagues. And I had no idea that they were all doing social impact work. And once we had conversations, I realized, oh, we're actually all doing the same thing. We should do this panel. We should get together and talk about working in terms of social impact. The interesting thing is, after I did this talk, I went and looked each of them up to try to find where they had published their research on social impact, and nobody had. And that's often because this is the work that we do that isn't often classified as technically research. It's often engagement. We often don't publish. We do this work because we care about it, but it often doesn't get recorded in the same ways. So this is one of the reasons why talking to colleagues can be so important, because we often do a poor job as a field of making this kind of work available for other people to see. So making colleagues even more important to talk to. So with that, changing tacks a little bit, I did want to mention, of course, government and university priorities. This is something that I also think is useful, particularly as you're starting to look at what universities and what resources are out there for people. The governments and universities typically set priorities, which might be called areas of excellence, themes, focus areas, strategies. And a lot of the priorities that they're currently setting are around research impact. If you can see if there is an alignment between your values, your research, and the priorities being set, this can help you sort of determine where there are potential resources, where the money or hours or time or other things are being put, and seeing that alignment between your work and these areas can be extremely useful. So often there are funding, collaborations, networks, other types of things being developed in these priority areas, and alignment, if you can make an alignment with them, and again, not to twist or contort your research, but see how your research aligns with it, this can be really useful for being able to access those resources, but also to be able to say, here is an area, what I'm doing is important, and it's been recognized as important by a government or a university as well. And for examples, if you're talking about RMIT, RMIT has 8 enabling impact platforms, and obviously we're at the social change, but you can see that these are the priority areas that the university has been setting, specifically thinking about areas of impact. So looking at these things can be helpful in terms of, are there people already doing the kind of work that I'm interested in? Are there resources already out there for that work? So then institutional supports. Obviously more and more institutions are interested in this type of work, so they're doing more to provide resources and support to promote impact. The thing that can often be quite difficult, of course, is to be able to identify them. So it often takes some work, some digging around to find them. Now, talking to people can be a great way to identify things, but there are other ways that you can do it. So going back to information science, generally, there are 4 main ways that people find information. So some of this is active seeking. So actively looking for information, such as looking on a university website for social impact work. That is a very useful way, and this is what we most typically think of when we think of looking for information. There's also, though, active scanning. So identifying a likely information source or person and paying attention. So if you know, okay, here are the people or here are the institutional offices that do this kind of work, let me just pay attention to what they're doing or saying. And this can be something like signing up for a newsletter if there is an impact office. They often have newsletters or events. So if you sign up for these things, you're actively taking part of it, but you're sort of scanning and seeing what's out there. Non-directed monitoring, which is a little bit less of a little bit less active, but this is serendipitously encountering useful information. So overhearing a conversation that contains useful information. But this often occurs in information grounds. So if you're putting yourself in a good spot, often you can come across things you might not have thought you would be able to locate simply because you're in the right spot. And then by proxy, which we've actually already talked about, this is if you are identified as somebody who needs information, people who have that information will often come and tell you. So again, it's the letting people know I'm interested in social change, social impact, you know, and often when we know that someone is looking for something, we're more likely to tell them. So there's lots of ways you can kind of go about this. And again, thinking about this, I know lots of people don't necessarily think about information science as a discipline, but when you know that these things are, these can be helpful sort of strategies in looking for information. So obviously, university websites are a good place to begin your search. However, there is a lot of challenge in identifying what they are actually, the terms are actually using. So again, as we talked about, there's lots of different terms for it. So getting to know what your university calls this type of work. Identifying offices or units that are dedicated to impact and engagement. There are often a lot of universities have this, sometimes at the faculty level, sometimes at the department level, unit level. There may be someone in an office who's dedicated to this. Often a dedicated unit is in a research office. So that's a really good place to start, but sometimes they could be in the library or other places as well. Sometimes, though, you will find that there is no dedicated unit, but that does not mean that there aren't supports for you. Often marketing can help you. If you have interesting findings, they can help you with publishing them, getting them out into newspapers or onto the university website. The media office, alumni relations, events, who can help you in arranging, if you're trying to involve stakeholders in different kinds of events, they can help you in planning and those types of things. So some of it is just recognizing that those things are out there, but of course it takes a little bit more than just knowing that. You have to, of course, determine what kind of supports they're able to offer. So do they have those newsletters, or is this more, here's where you go for that event help? A lot of them will actually help you to establish collaborations with businesses or community groups. Some of them actually have dedicated funding as well. And of course, setting up meetings with the staff who are in those offices or around the university can be a great way to learn what you actually can do, especially if you're at the beginning of a research project, as well as to establish relationships with them because you're likely to talk to them multiple times. And if, of course, if you're planning a project, thinking of this type of work at the beginning can really help. So putting together a grant application, putting together a new research project, if you meet with impact staff as early as possible, you can start to think of how you can build that in as part of the fundamental project itself. As well, that often, particularly offices that are in research, units that are in research offices will often have examples of funded projects that have the impact, that are impact projects that you can take a look at. So some of these services will be free, people who are helping you identify sources of funding, helping you plan events, those kinds of things. And of course, others might require money, such as creating an infographic of your findings to share on social media. But there's a wide variety of things that are available, and knowing what's out there, but also, you know, what costs money, what costs time, who do I talk to, all of this can be extremely helpful in your planning. And of course, RMIT has an area for research partnerships. This whole group connects researchers with partners outside the university. So some of this, again, is already there. And of course, then there are lots of resources all over the place, not just within institutions, but there's lots of opportunities in terms of conferences, events, workshops, courses, collaborations, networks that already exist out there. Some of them are run by disciplinary associations. So if you're part of your discipline, they may already be working on this, and there may be people that you can connect with. Government bodies, research networks, community organizations are often all interested in this kind of work. Colleagues and staff members can often point out the best resources though, because again, this space gets awfully complicated. I'm still getting my head around it, and the landscape looks fairly different in different places, so it's useful to talk to people about where to start, especially to guide you towards better organizations. But this is an example. The Center for Social Impact has sector events. They put on events. They also do education and other kinds of research, but knowing that an organization like the Center for Social Impact exists and that they have workshops, this can be a really useful example of what you can get from the community. So those are examples of the collegial supports and institutional supports. And I mentioned that it's also important for people who are in positions of authority as heads of academic units, HDR supervisors, and senior scholars to help sort of foster this, because again, it is often for lots of people new, and it's quite a diverse sector to get into. So often having people to go to is a very useful thing. I would say for those people who are in positions of authority, they can help particularly by decreasing barriers. So barriers in terms of knowledge and funding and other things. And some of the ways they can do this is to simply be a source of information, to be up to date on what's happening within the institution, and disciplinary association to act as a proxy, to be that person who can help guide someone and answer questions and pass along information to them. This is something that is also extremely helpful to start to create and curate a list of information sources and supports for more junior colleagues and students to go to for information, because there is so much out there and not all of it is going to be helpful. Not all of it may be particularly high quality. So to start to create that is an extremely useful thing. And this helps to take the guesswork out of where people should go and basically puts people on a much better footing to start off with. So I have created lists like this for other topics. It's a really useful thing to have, and once you've created this list, of course, it can be used in a lot of different ways. And then, of course, mentorship, collaborating with junior colleagues and students and allowing them opportunities to actively engage in impact work is extremely helpful to give them that experience, to show them how it's done, as well as that sort of scaffolding, that support in what they're doing. So that's just a brief discussion about fostering impact. In terms of final thoughts, that it is really important to keep in mind that this work does not happen overnight. It is a lot of building networks, acquiring new skills, all these things that we know take time and energy, but they can be integrated into the work that you're already doing. It doesn't necessarily require you to completely overhaul anything. There's supports out there. We don't have to take this work on alone. We don't have to reinvent any wheels because there are people already in these spaces. But research engagement and impact is vital. It's really important that we start to think about how we can apply the research that we do, and it can be extremely rewarding for the communities that we're doing impact work with, as well as for ourselves. So I did just want to end with a shameless plug. This is where, so I wrote a chapter for this book, The Impactful Academic, Building a Research Career That Makes a Difference. So this talk was based on a chapter from that work that was edited by Dr. Wade Kelly, who's actually in the back row here. But it is, I mean, obviously it is a shameless plug. I do think it is a very excellent book that sort of is a place to begin to think about a lot of these things. So there's several chapters that talk about sort of how to orient yourself and what you can do as part of this. So there's, I mean, obviously there's this book, there are lots of other resources out there, and obviously there's a lot of people at RMIT who really care about this work. So knowing that as a good place to start can be very helpful. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Becky. We do have some time for questions, so I hope that you've got some burning in the back of your mind. And then we're going to turn the lights on because it's like starting to get very dark in this place. Yes, right at the back. Oh, sorry. I'll do the point and click. I think if you can turn on your microphone, you get a little button. Yay.
Oh yeah, did that work? Cheers. No, it doesn't move. Hi. Good. My name is Eleanor Collar. I'm a librarian at the University of Melbourne. So RMIT students, please don't email me. Sorry. My work is peripheral in this space. So thank you for providing so much context there. And I guess in this environment, I act as a bit of a proxy to give information to people who may need it. I'm just curious to a point at the start of your presentation where you defined social impact in regard to the REF and that definition. Yeah. Yes, that looked too. But I guess the REF's definition is all about the positive impacts of social impact. And I was just wondering, do you see a place in this conversation for potentially negative impacts of social impact? And what are we discussing around that? Where are we documenting that? Or are we just ignoring that element of research?
Right. This is a really interesting thing, actually. I mean, I always think we have to talk about what happens as a result of our research. There are not always the sort of venues for that kind of thing. And actually, this is not exactly the same thing, but Lisa and I have a panel in for a conference where hopefully it will get accepted to talk about failure. That this is a lot of time we sort of are required to talk about things in positive ways. And I do think sometimes even our failures can be turned into positives and understanding and all the rest of it. I don't know if I have a good answer for your question. I do think that we have to have these conversations, and I think maybe it's not always going to be published, but I think having these conversations amongst researchers, particularly with students, with people who are in our fields, to have these real conversations about where should we be working and what we should be doing. I think often when we're concerned about having a negative impact, I think often we're talking about working with particular communities who maybe have been over-researched or left out or sort of marginalized in different ways. And I think when that's the case, I think what's really important is that we are involving them more in the whole process, rather than coming in and saying, I've done this research, here's what you should know, is actually doing that more integrating for them. But I don't know if I have a really good answer for your question. Maybe we can talk more afterwards. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. I'm Dana McKay. I'm from RMIT. I just want to follow that up with, I would point to the tech industry as a place where there are negative consequences of research that are not necessarily even that unintended, but I think we should all be considering the potential negative outcomes of our research. Unfortunately, by the time we've asked the question, it's usually too late. My question was more around, I love that you're talking about the social impacts of research, but often that is not something that is valued by the structures and processes within which we work. It's all about, unless it can bring money in, the impact doesn't matter, right? So you looked at the Australian things and it's all about economic benefits. Yes. Do you have any advice for those of us who frankly could not give a flying monkeys about economic benefits in kind of reframing our social benefits as economic benefits?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think part of it is, can you point to other things, other priorities, government and university? Are there ways to kind of, there's a lot of like well-being and, other kinds of sort of groups of priorities that often we can align ourselves more and showing that we have this kind of orientation. I do think it is a difficult thing. The field that I come from, some people are very tech oriented and they can, have spin-off companies and those kinds of things, whereas I do a lot of work with, areas that is not going to be an outcome. But I think part of it is trying to make the case for it and looking for other people that we can align ourselves with to demonstrate this. And I think I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that we're getting better at being more open and broad about what we think is important. But maybe that's me being a little glass half full. But I think we can make good cases for it, even if it's not necessarily going to be of economic benefit. I think we can definitely show where that benefit is happening, and that maybe people should be paying more attention in those areas. That's a really good question.
Other questions? Wade?
To answer or to respond, talk to an economist and work with an economist, because there's lots of ways of demonstrating social benefit that has a degree of result in the economy that you can be very strategic about. Becky, I have a question about your slide about services within universities. You talked about media comms, other things. You didn't mention the library, which is shocking because that's your discipline. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what libraries can do to support social impact?
That is thank you, Wade, for that question. It wasn't a plant, but it obviously could have been. But I think it really does depend on the library and the resources that they have. But often, I mean, you should always get to know your academic librarian. There will be librarians who are specifically assigned to your area of discipline that you can talk to, but there are a lot of people who are there who can start to guide you towards, funding sources and those kinds of things. And often, I mean, it starts with a conversation to see, what's actually available through them. But that's a really good point of there are lots of ways and more people to talk to about that. Yeah. I don't have any really specific things because, I mean, I would say lots of places have dedicated staff within academic libraries. I don't know about RMIT or others because I know the landscape is quite different country to country. But yes, talk to your librarians.
Great question for over drinks. Any final questions of our speaker today? Yeah, 1, 2 at the back.
Thanks, Amanda Lawrence from RMIT. Yeah, it was really a great talk, and something that I've really noticed is that there's a lot of emphasis on communicating research and not much thought given or encouraged to think about how is somebody out there going to get that proxy information. Are you providing your material in a way that is going, for the person that might be looking for it, maybe in a couple of years' time, so social media may not help you in that area. Yeah, and how do we kind of bridge that divide between communication and information seeking and make them a bit more kind of integrated?
And I think so. I mean, I don't have a quick answer for that one for sure, but I think part of it is that integrating with the communities that you want to be communicating with at the start. That if you can identify key people, key organizations of here's who we would like to speak with, and go to them before you do the research and say, okay, here's what we're thinking about. What should we do? What should we, and really build a plan with them in mind. I think that that's a really important thing. That is tough work. And that's years of establishing relationships and things like that as well. But I think those are often the best ways to target those kinds of people. Yeah, it's always an issue. It really is.
Hi, thank you. My question relates to demonstrating impact. Often the impact is measured or documented through qualitative means, and sometimes the process and the practice that you were mentioning here, that from the very start and not just about dissemination, sometimes process itself is impact. And my trouble has been to demonstrate impact, process as impact. It's not an output as such. So, for example, knowledge co-production, where you're working with stakeholders and communities from the very start in even defining the problem. So, what is your suggestion?
That is such a good question. I've been thinking a lot about that. The current project that I'm working on, actually, and Lisa is a part of it as well, we're talking to academics who are on short-term contracts. And these are people who are working, 6 months, 4-month contracts. They're doing a ton of work. We sent out emails inviting people, and we were inundated. We had more people who had volunteered that we could interview. I had a number of people say, thank you so much for interviewing us. And I'm thinking they're giving their time, they're super busy, they, all the rest of it. And that is very difficult to capture. I think part of it is also, I think if you're doing an interview, and of course I was recording my interviews, I have those quotes that I could start to pull. I think we have to think differently about how we can capture that evidence. And I think it is that sort of narrative story. I think we might need to be, to ask our participants, if we're doing this kind of work, is there can I use this kind of story? Could we maybe talk in a month? But this requires a lot of extra work and planning, and it isn't as straightforward. So I don't have that really good, here's exactly what you need to do. But I think the more conversations we have about this, because I'm running into this problem in the exact same way. So maybe this is something we could talk over wine and cheese, but it's an excellent point.
I love it. She's edging towards the reception already. Thank you so much for those questions. That's fantastic. And thank you very much, Becky. This is a small token of thanks from us. But thank you for coming all this way and talking about your work. And before I turn it over to Sarah, who's going to facilitate the next part of our program, I just wanted to pause and say a huge thank you to the College of Design and Social Context, who is sponsoring this event and working with me. This is a huge team effort. As Steve was alluding to, we have been planning this for a very long time. We meet on a weekly basis. And hopefully they're not all going to run out of the room, but I want to thank all of the people on the team. Obviously, Steve has come into the role this year and jumped in with both feet, which has been fantastic. Anastasia, we've got Alan, who's up in the corner. We've got Esther here. And we've also got a couple of people who aren't here tonight, but Nicole Scott, who has been developing the website, doing all of our socials and getting that communication out there, as well as Ari Sharp, who has been integral to the lead up and then decided to go on mat leave just before the event came round. So thanks to all of them. Couldn't do it without such a fantastic team. On that note, I'm now going to turn over to Sarah, who's going to facilitate our launch.
And now for something completely different, but actually completely related. We thought today, with the last few minutes that we have, we would do something that honestly, in my opinion, doesn't happen enough, which is to kind of publicly celebrate a major accomplishment. In this case, the publication of a book. This is a new edition, the 5th edition of a book called Looking for Information. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about this book, and we have 2 of the authors here, and also some thoughts from the third author as well. And we are going to wrap up on time so that everyone can make their way out to where the food and drink are. So let me tell you a little bit about this book. It's, again, looking for information, examining research on how people engage with information, which you've just heard Becky speak about for some while throughout her talk. The purpose of this book is really to provide an in-depth look at the international research on how people engage with information. And so by that we mean, research into how people come to need information, seek information, but also create information, share information, even embody it. And Looking for Information, if you haven't heard of it, this is the single most important book on this topic, and it has been since the first edition was published in 2002. This book introduces you to a whole century of scholarship, and what's really important about the 5th edition is that the authors have very intentionally invited and they've really written with people outside of information science in mind. So you are intentionally welcomed into this literature. We're all aware of the growing kind of ubiquitous emphasis on interdisciplinarity, and the pandemic in particular provides us such a compelling current ongoing case of the need for high quality available information, but also the need for experts of all kinds to be aware that this body of expertise and all of the experts who create it, they exist, and they specialize in knowing about how people interact with information, even avoid or reject information, and so on. So there's really never been a more pressing time for us to kind of work together to examine some many complex questions in society. And information and how people relate to it really underlies and is at the heart of all of the pressing issues that we're addressing through our research today. The last thing I want to mention here on this slide is that, you know, you've been hearing about information science today, and this book, Looking for Information, does reside in that discipline as its home. But information science, if you're not acquainted with us, welcome. We look forward to welcoming you in, because information science is inherently a very permeable and hospitable discipline. And so throughout this new edition, as with past editions of this book, you're going to find selections from media and communications, sociology, psychology, computing science, education, management, public health, and so on. And that's because there's relevant work about how people engage with information in many other disciplines outside of information science as well. So this is really a holistic attempt to bring all this literature together. And really, we need all of these broad perspectives to illuminate people's interactions with information. So the person who wrote the first 3 editions of this book all on his own. His name is Donald Case. He's now an emeritus professor from the University of Kentucky. This book was his idea. He had the idea in 1991. I'm paraphrasing I have the entire timeline, but I'm not going to recite it all for you. But suffice it to say that between the first edition and the 4th edition, for which Lisa Given was the second author, that spans almost 20 years, 1,500 references. That's how big the reference list got. And Donald estimates, although it's hard to count now that we're in the era of the ebook, about 24,000 copies sold. So that's notable for something that starts, like many book ideas or many ideas period, with this kernel of an idea. I thought I would sell a few copies and maybe it would be of interest for people in library and information science programs and so on. So what the authors, which include Professor Lisa Given, who's here, and also Dr. Rebekah Willson, who's also in the room here, what distinguishes the 5th edition, you'll have to read it to believe it, is that they include even more references, but there's fewer pages. So yeah, watch to see how that happens. So, and Donald sent some lovely remarks. In the interest of time, I'm just going to share a couple of sentences. He was reflecting that as he looks back over the nearly 30 years during which he's written parts of this book, he's amazed at the growth in interest, in number of investigators, in diversity of topics, methods, and theories, and it's been exciting to have played even a small role in encouraging such creativity and scholarship. Becky, did you want to say a couple of things?
Because people haven't heard enough from me today.
Just say.
Yeah, so I'm very excited about this book. I still remember the first time, I mentioned this story to a couple of people in the room, but the first time I met Donald Case, I didn't even actually meet him. We were in a lift at a conference and I looked over and there he was and I thought, oh my goodness, that's Donald Case, because that's how much impact that this book had on me as a scholar. And I've been in the field for now 17 years, and it really, it's amazing to be a part of the process of writing this book because it really made me reflect back on it. And we often, a lot of the work in this area started off as, thinking about the formal kinds of information that people find as part of their research, and it has expanded in really interesting ways. An article I looked at not that long ago was looking at 4-year-olds and giving them smartphones so that they could take pictures of the things that they cared about. And this field has just really taken off in terms of the types of projects that people are working on, the kind of that's a fun sound, the type of methods that they're using, that it's not just the quantitative anymore, but it's welcoming to all kinds of other participatory methods, ethnographic methods, artistic methods. And that was one of the things I really enjoyed. I got to talk about methods and methodology. That was one of the chapters that I particularly focused on, and it was so fabulous to see the breadth of things, but also then that is interdisciplinarity that's been mentioned, that there's a recognition that information is important across so many different areas, and sort of welcoming that in and starting to see that all these other disciplines are starting to work together. So it's, yeah, it's a book that's really exciting to be a part of, and I was really, I got to be a research assistant on the 4th edition, and now being an author on it has just been a wonderful experience. So we're hoping that more people get a chance to look at it and understand the field sort of and its broad scope. So thanks.
Too funny. Oh, thanks, Sarah. We had hoped this book was meant to be out by now, and I really had hoped to have actual physical copies, but such is the life of dealing with a book and publishers and the joys that it all brings. I'm leaning into the joy at this point. Yeah, thank you for those comments, and it's lovely to kind of reflect back with Donald. When the very first edition of this came out, I was an assistant prof in my first job, like a couple of years in the job. And, you know, you get these gurus in the field and you don't realize that, you know, flip forward kind of 13 or so, 12 years that you'll be co-authoring with them and working with them. And I think it really speaks to, you know, this is all of our disciplines, they are communities. We get to know each other, and you put these people on pedestals, but at the end of the day, why? You know, they're just interesting people that you can take for coffee. So never be shy about taking a role as a research assistant or grabbing a coffee with someone or tracking them down in an elevator, whatever it might be. But beware that, you know, you can't leave. So once Becky was an RA on the book, that was it. Her future was written in stone. But I wanted to just kind of position this within the Australian context and just link it to a very important report that if you have not read it, you should please go and Google it and download it and have a read. Last July, CSIRO put out this report on the 7 global megatrends. How many here have actually read this report? Maybe a little bit. Yep. Oh, yes. Amanda's like, yes, I have. I know it cover to cover. And when we were writing this book, so just as a bit of a teaser, this thrilled CSIRO because I actually wrote to them and I said, I want to put this in the book. It's going to be, it is in the final chapter where we actually look at the future and we do a little bit of prediction about what is looking for information going to look like down the track. And they were thrilled. They had to figure out how to give me permission to put it in the book. And I was like, oh, okay, this is really groundbreaking, too funny. But what I found really interesting about the diagram, and we had a workshop, the EIP directors, with the folks from CSIRO. And I remember at the time just going, this is so interesting. There's this one piece called Unlocking the Human Dimension. And I remember saying to the authors, you know, for me, the human dimension is in every single one of the other quadrants. I do not understand why, you know, and then I was like, okay, I'm just going to step away now. Because for them, you know, when you're talking about climate change, you're talking about a variety of things, but they tend to position the human as a separate and very important component, but not something that sits within. And for me, information behavior at its heart is sitting within. And what I did in the book then was I actually broke this down and I started saying, you know, what are some of the research questions that we would ask about these things? And I think it just demonstrates the fact that this book is intended for a global audience and for a cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary audience. You know, if you're interested in climate change, which is one, obviously, adapting to climate change is one of the main features in their report. And I started thinking, well, what information are people going to need to adapt their lives to a changing climate? How do people decide whether to relocate or to stay and to adapt to extreme events? When do you decide to actually get off the island because it's drowning? Do government policies reflect people's migration needs in this type of a new context? These are just some of the information related questions that we would ask in our field. And so when we think about climate change and things that might be happening, whether you're in urban studies or whether you're in engineering, whatever your discipline might be, there are informational questions at the core of that. The same with when we look at sustainability, right? They've got leaner, cleaner, greener. Well, what information strategies do we need to educate communities? When I talk to people in the sustainability area, to me, it's all about embedding the human and figuring out what those information needs are. And they know that they've got a human behavior problem. That's really at the heart of sustainability issues, right? The escalating health imperative. Health information is a huge part of our field. It always has been, it always will be, because the minute you are diagnosed or a family member is ill, you're grappling with a whole suite of questions that never occurred to you before and that are really, truly life and death that you don't know how to deal with. That's at the core of what we look at in this field. And I can go all the way around the bend. You have to read the rest of the book to kind of figure out all those components. But all of that just to say that we're here, we're doing interdisciplinary work. If you're interested in any of these areas, please do come chat with us. And at the very minimum, please buy the book.
In the interest of time, I'm not going to, thank you, Lisa. I'm not going to tell the entire story about how I tried to get a congratulatory certificate from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, but it didn't quite work out. But I'll tell that elsewhere. With the last minute, I do just want to share a couple of words, because although I didn't get any response from Justin Trudeau, I did get a couple of congratulatory messages from people that we actually know. So I'm just going to share, these are brief excerpts, and I'll share the rest with you on our own time. So I had a comment from a professor at the University of Toronto, Dr. Jenna Hartel. Jenna says, the information behavior specialty and literature is sprawling, evolving, and shaggy, which is an accurate way of saying it. Looking for information is a miraculous epicenter. And the other one I'll share briefly, this is the last one, comes from the great state of New York, from Professor Dr. Heidi Julian, who says, my copy is on its way. And like all scholars in the field, my first task will be to check how many of my papers have been cited. Thank you for your hard work, and sincere congratulations to Dawn, Lisa, and Becky. I have some other ones to share with you as well, but I want to wrap things up. Congratulations again to the authors. I want to just hold up this pamphlet or this sheet that's by the door. If you want a keepsake and to remind you and to get a discount, it's all on this page. And the other reminder is just that we have an entire week of programming ahead, and you're definitely welcome back to join for the next keynote, the second of the two keynotes this week. This one is Wednesday afternoon, different place, same time on Wednesday. And so with that, we just want to thank you and wish you a lovely evening. Thanks for being here.